40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. Thanks for listening here on a Friday morning as we are talking Ohio State football. We are not talking about will they play, how will they play, COVID, any of that junk. We are talking about football. We're still a little bit less than a month away from the start of the season, but the weather's starting to turn. We've seen all the other leagues starting to play. Big news coming out of the Pac-12 here recently as well. So I want to welcome in my guest, Adam McClintock, also known as the CFB professor on social media, and I think that everybody here will enjoy his insights into how he sees the college football season going down. First and foremost, thanks for being part of the show, Adam.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
So for people that maybe are not familiar with everything that you do, why don't you kind of explain just the way that you break down and look at the sport that so many people love?
Well, what I do is this is a mathematical model that I've created over about 12 years that I attempt to take all objectivity out of analyzing a college football season or a college football team, and try to just do it just strictly by the numbers. That way, there's no bias of any kind in it. And every year I actually go through and I try to look for biases that could possibly be there and weed them out. I've pretty successfully done that. My prediction model usually in the last 12 years averages about 76% straight up, which is give that some context. That's pretty close to what the Vegas opening lines are. It's slightly better than FPI, and it's slightly better than the Sagarin as well. I also do a lot of coaching evaluations, grading coaches based on their efficiency, head coaches, offensive coordinators, and defensive coordinators. So I kind of have my thumb in about, many pies in the college football world.
So as you try to remove biases or whatnot, and obviously everything that we run here at Buckeye Grove obviously is quite biased toward Ohio State, people would say. I mean, what are some of the things that that you see in terms of through your modeling and everything else when you look at Ohio State that maybe the average fan may not, consider?
Well, one of the things I consider when analyzing any college football team that a lot of people don't is I go through both the defensive and offensive coordinator's efficiency, for the career, and I kind of bake that into the model's projections. So there are many ways to view efficiency. People use points per drive, yards per play, points per game, but I attempt to break the game down to its smallest unit, which is just a single play. I don't pay attention to any stat that has anything to do with yards because no one ever won a game because they had more yards. Field position matters, but I don't care about yards per play. That doesn't, really factor into anything I do. I look at each coordinator's career per play efficiency using a database that I've created that tracks every play called for both offensive and defensive coordinators since 2008. So using this data, I'm able to determine how hard an offense has to work to score a single point under a certain offensive coordinator. And on the other hand, on the other side of the ball, how hard a defense forces an offense to work before they allow a single point to be scored.
And I'll get into Ohio State's coordinators here in a second, but I think the natural progression here is what does your data, what is the modeling saying about this 2020 edition of the Ohio State Buckeyes?
Well, the model actually likes this 2020 Ohio State team to win the Big Ten fairly easily this year. The only possible hiccup it sees is being the second game at Penn State. And in fact, that game is the only game all year long the model doesn't have the Buckeyes favored by at least a double-digit margin. So the model is projecting an 8-0 record with a floor of 7-1, and that one loss potentially being against that Penn State game. some of the strengths that are coming out through the model. There's a lot of returning production in the passing game. There's a tremendous group of returning wide receivers, along with Justin Fields in his second year in the system. It'll be interesting to kind of see how Mike Yurcich's departure, what kind of effect it has on the passing game preparation. But it should still be strong. J.K. Dobbins' absence will be felt in the run game. His loss of that returning production there is indicated by the model. But the number and quality of starts you had along the offensive line returning should make up for that and may soften that blow a little bit. The defense is very talented, but it will need to replace a lot of production, especially along the defensive line in the secondary. But for the most part, those are very minor glitches in this 2020 Ohio State team. They should have a fairly easy run at the Big Ten title and are, definitely one of the four teams I have going to the playoff this year.
And sticking with the defensive theme and talking about coordinators, and Ohio State 2 years ago, kind of a bit of an anomaly on defense, really just struggled. They bring in Jeff Hafley for 1 year. The defense shores itself up. He's off to Boston College now as a head coach. Ohio State brings in a very known quantity in Kerry Combs, who had spent a couple years on Mike Vrabel's staff in Tennessee in the NFL with the Titans. But now he comes into the DC role. We know in a lot of ways there's a lot of coaching by committee that goes on or whatnot, but he is the DC. I mean, what does that mean maybe to the model, having a first year DC coming in, and does that really throw things into chaos or anything, or are you able to track a lot of things based on his longtime coaching record still in the college game, with the NFL only being a couple of years?
Well, really, I mean, there is a lot of familiarity with him in the program. He was the secondary coach there for years before he went to Tennessee with Vrabel. And he may end up being a great defensive coordinator. We don't know that yet, but it's, and I'm sure he was involved in a lot of the defensive game planning in his past there, as well as maybe Tennessee with Vrabel. But as of right now, he remains an unknown quantity to the model, as far as game day, decision making on, from the sideline or from the booth, wherever they're going to have him. So that's what he remains right now. The model is just an unknown quantity. But I get around that with I'm able to kind of correlate the average defensive coordinator with the amount of roster talent that he has compared to the amount of roster talent he'll be going against. And I kind of zero in on a number on what he should be able to achieve as a baseline. And I use that going forward in the projections. So once again, it all comes back to numbers. It all comes back to being unbiased. He has a great track record. He has a great pedigree, but just the cold math of it, he is an unknown quantity right now. He has a lot of talent to work with, and he may end up being great, much the way Hafley did last year. But as of right now, he is an unknown quantity as far as defensive play calling.
But he is teamed up with a known quantity in Greg Madison, who's the co-DC, who has been in the program at Ohio State for the 1 year, but obviously has the track record at Michigan and Notre Dame and Florida. So, I mean, that certainly has to. I mean, Ohio State's definitely looking forward to having as much experience. You throw in Larry Johnson. I don't want to leave any other coaches out. Al Washington, Matt Barnes, who assists in the secondary. It's a very deep coaching roster for the Buckeyes.
Oh, absolutely. You look at staff like Ohio State or Clemson or Alabama. You look at all the support staff. They have an army of support staff. I mean, there's not one aspect that they're not looking at in some way, shape, or form they don't have eyeballs on. So all those things go into it. All those things go into make those coaches' job, easier and allow them to be able to pick up and get after this thing quicker than most would. Greg Madison, I have him graded as a low B coach for his career. So he is above average, but he's not quite as good as what Hafley showed last year. So I'm anxious to see whether Madison was more involved in the defense than what we know, or how much, where that split was with Hafley and Madison. I think that will come out this year a little bit, and if things hit the ground running and and there really isn't a drop off, then you know it was a big time, coaching by committee type of situation.
I know it's difficult to look at what we see going into this season and comparing it with completed seasons in the past, but I'm still going to ask because it's my show, so that's what I'm going to do. But I mean, historically, how does your data on Ohio State compare, getting ready to go into this 2020 season, into just a conference-only schedule, whatever, compared to previous Ohio State teams under, Ryan Day's era is only 1 year long, but Urban Meyer and so on and so forth. You say you've been doing this since '08 or whatnot. So I mean, you have more than a few years to be able to draw from.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, go ahead and ask those questions. That's what my model is great for, is that it levels the playing field throughout the years. The 2020 version of the Buckeyes has them as the fourth best Buckeye team since 2008. To kind of put that in context, and it's really, really close between the 2018, 2017, and this year's team. Put that in further context, the team that we just saw last year, which was I have as the best Buckeyes team since 2008. If the 2020 version of the Buckeyes were to play the 2019 version of the Buckeyes on a neutral field, my model would like the 2019 Buckeyes by about 6 points. So that kind of gives you some context on where this 2020 version is compared to where that 2019 version was and how they compare. So, I mean, considering that 2019 version of the Buckeyes is considered by my model, at least by my mathematical model, to be the best in over a decade, that's pretty encouraging to see that they are that close together. This could be a very special season for the Buckeyes if especially if that defensive side of the ball can really pull together and take off where they left off last year.
And that's where I was going to follow up with. Is going to say, what, based on just what you've seen and whatnot within your analysis, what is it that should concern Ohio State fans the most? And and I think we're really kind of splitting hairs in a lot of ways when you're saying that this team less than a touchdown dog to the 19 team, which really came within a play or two of going to the championship game. A lot of what ifs. We're not going to get into what happened in that Clemson game at this point, but what is the concern that you see? If there is one, glaring or just subtle?
There's not really any glaring issues. I would call glaring. There are some subtle issues that you might want to kind of shine a light on and pay attention to if you're a Buckeye fan. Replacing the production off of last year's defensive line. We said it when the Bosa's were there. Oh, how are you going to replace Bosa? And then Chase Young comes along, and it's just sometimes it's one of those things where it's just the next guy in line that we don't know about. But Chase Young was a special talent along that line, and they lost a couple other guys along that line as well that were special talents. So replacing those guys on the defensive line, replacing the guys in the secondary, getting Sean Wade back is going to help quite a bit. That compounded along with the new DC and Kerry Combs, maybe that is something to kind of keep an eye on there. Like I said, he might be great, but right now he's kind of an unknown quantity as far as his game day defensive play calling. So pay attention to that. Also, I think that's something that I think Buckeye fans who are really engrossed in the program. I think I've heard this from a few out there, but replacing a back like J.K. Dobbins could be extremely could be an issue, at least initially. Like I said earlier, that could soften a little bit with the quality of offensive line that's coming back. It could be one of the better offensive lines Ohio State's had in quite a while. But we kind of saw the dynamic that was lost when J.K. Dobbins came out of the game in the college football playoff for a few series. He brought a completely different dynamic. I don't know if you can just plug any one player in and replace him. Maybe they have a committee of guys that can do it. But initially, I think that might be something to watch. Also, I want to see what the passing game, how the passing game changes, if at all, now that Mike Yurcich has moved on. I know he wasn't involved in necessarily the play calling, but I think he had a lot to do with some of the passing concepts we saw last year. We'll see if that changes at all, and if it has any effect on the Buckeyes' high flying attack we saw last year.
Obviously, a lot of points, and I guarantee you that every coach over there at the Woody Hayes facility, they want to know these answers too. And I think they'll start getting some ideas here come the 30th when they can at least put the pads on, and then the short run up to the start of the season on the 24th. But we're gonna take a quick break and hear from one of our great sponsors, and we will be back in 30 seconds to talk about the Big Ten in general. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon, and I'm joined by the CFB professor, Adam McClintock, and his great analytics that he does. You should be sure to check him out, and we'll tell you how you can see all of his work at the end of the show. But, we talked about the Big Ten, and you said that, with the 8-game regular season schedule, Ohio State looking like 8-0, kind of with a floor of 7-1. How do you see the rest of the Big Ten shaping up? We don't want to necessarily say, list them all from 1 to 14, but, who do you see? And I think especially coming out of the West, because the West year in and year out, people want to pencil in Wisconsin. Some years that's right. Some years it's wrong. I don't think anybody saw Northwestern coming the year that they made it to the championship game. Iowa can be a little bit of a trendy pick. When is Scott Frost going to get it turned around at Nebraska? Seems to be a lot of things going on in the West and not a lot of clarity.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think right now you have to look at Wisconsin and the type of program they have going right now, and you have to kind of give them the nod until somebody is able to consistently come up and knock them off the pedestal. My model likes Wisconsin out of the West. It's really going to come down to, it looks like, Wisconsin and Iowa. Iowa is replacing a 4-year starting quarterback. That's tough, and Nate Stanley. But they potentially have a very good returning offensive lineman or offensive line unit this year. Watching Iowa football for years, that's one of their staples. They get a good offensive line going, and that's really up their alley. So I would watch that Wisconsin Iowa game as kind of the deciding factors in the West. Watch Northwestern. They're real sneaky here. They return a lot of returning production. They finally got rid of an offensive coordinator that I have been begging them to get rid of for years. I expect that side of the ball to improve for them. And Mike Hankwitz, who I love on the defensive side of the ball for them, will continue to put out a stingy defense. But those two at the top, I see Wisconsin and Iowa. It's really theirs to lose, with really Wisconsin being a favorite to win the West.
When we look at the conference, who's a team that you think might overperform, and conversely one that might underperform? I have my ideas, but my model is, if I had a model, I'd be living in Vegas, and I would be frequenting the sports books and everything else. I'm just as dumb as anybody else, so I don't think anybody's here listening to my opinions.
Yeah. Well, see, that's why I made a math model, because my opinion's not very good as well. I don't want my opinion involved in any of this. But one team that I think will I really like two teams here, but I like Indiana and Northwestern. I think are going to both going to overperform. But out of those two, I'll stick with the one and go with Northwestern. I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. The Wildcats, they have finally replaced the long-time offensive coordinator, Mick McCall, there with Mike Bajakian. I looked at offense to be more productive under Bajakian. McCall, he was kind of the anchor for that team for a while, in my opinion. Northwestern, you think about them, they always had kind of a stingy defense with an offense that just seemed to get by fairly. Now, Bajakian gives them a chance to maybe have a little bit more oomph on that side of the ball. Once again, Hankwitz is still there as a DC. He's got most of his returning production to work with. So that side of the ball should continue to be stingy. And their schedule sets up really nicely. You look at their East crossovers that they drew. They drew Maryland and Michigan State. So those are two very beatable teams for them. And when the rest of the West is playing at least one of the blue bloods from the opposite side. So that's the team I look for to really overachieve expectations of Northwestern and bounce back from kind of a down year last year. A team I see underperforming is Minnesota, and that might be kind of shocking to some people because of their breakout year last year. But this will be the first season that PJ Fleck has been a head coach without Kirk Soraka calling the plays for him. Kirk Soraka moved on to Penn State. I was kind of underwhelmed with the Mike Sanford Jr. hire that they replaced him with. And although they do return a good chunk of that offense, I don't think they'll be as prolific as we saw last season. And I don't know if Bateman has got back in or not. Has been able to opt back in. If he can't, that's going to be a further blow to their offense. Add this to the losses they suffered on defense and the rumored lack of preparation that may or may not have occurred in Minneapolis due to the COVID postponement of the season. I think this may be a return to the pack year for the Gophers.
Just for the sake of full disclosure, the teams that I had Minnesota as my underachiever, and I had Indiana as my overachiever. So I wasn't.
There we go.
I wasn't far off, but of course, there are people who, longtime listeners to the show, are like, "Oh, you're just full of it. You're just trying to sound smart." But I'm serious. Those are the teams that I had there. I'm sure a lot of my listeners would have really liked for me to say that Michigan would be the underachieving team, but you can't have them all at this point. And I mean, obviously, when you sat there and you said that Penn State really was the one team that wasn't modeling out as a double-digit dog, it sounds like Michigan maybe not. I'm old enough, and I've been around this program long enough to remember plenty of years under John Cooper when the Buckeyes brought far and away the better team to the game, only to have the ball bounce the wrong way for 13 years or whatever, 2-10-1 under John Cooper. So I never take anything for granted, but I think that there might be some challenges there in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and that very well may be. I'm kind of surprised they let you say that word on the air and on an Ohio State podcast. Isn't it supposed to be the team up north?
They can't make me do push-ups.
So okay, that makes sense. No, yeah, and that's the fun of college football, man. Is we can sit back and we can analyze this from every angle we can, but there's still 18, 19, 20-year-old kids full of passion that go out there and play. That's why we watch. If this was robotic, it wouldn't be fun. So, I look forward to watching the game every year. I grew up a Nebraska fan in Lincoln, and that was one of the games that were outside my, of the conference that my team of choice at the time played in that I always watched every year was the Ohio State-Michigan game. So, yeah, rivalries like that, lately it hasn't been an issue, but those are rivalry games for a reason. So it'll be interesting to see what Michigan does there as a maybe possibly a big underdog.
On Thursday night, the news came out that the Pac-12 is returning for a late start on the season, but we're going to take them off the table right now in terms of the three Power 5 conferences that have been going already. The ACC and the Big 12 started a couple weeks ago. The SEC starts this weekend. How does the Big Ten in general stack up with these other power conferences? I mean, I think that when it comes to Ohio State fans and Big Ten fans, I mean, they really only kind of look across the way at the SEC. Clemson has really been the class of the ACC for quite some time now, and it's been kind of the middle has been toward the bottom. And then when it comes to the Big 12 has always just kind of it's been Oklahoma here recently. They obviously got off to a very bad start with Iowa State and K-State and some other teams dropping games that you wouldn't think on paper that they should drop. But where's what are you seeing in terms of the Big Ten in general in terms of the conference bragging rights going into this year?
Well, yeah, I mean the model kind of agrees with everything you're saying right there. The Big Ten, it seems the Big Ten is the second best conference in the country this year. With an average team index of about 86.5. Compare that to the SEC, whose average team index is about 93.8. So to put that in a little easier context for people to understand, the average Big Ten team would be about a 3.5 point underdog to the average SEC team at this time, according to the model. So the conferences are close. The big difference being, the bottom of the Big Ten is far worse than the bottom of the SEC at this point. The teams at the top tier and even in the middle tier are not that far off from where the SEC is this year. But you get towards the bottom of each conference, and that's where they kind of diverge. But that really is the Big Ten and the SEC are the two big dogs in college football this year. Everybody else, like you said, Clemson owns the ACC. Miami is down, maybe seeing a little bit of a resurgence with Derek King there. Florida State has had yet another regime change and is trying to gain traction. Virginia Tech isn't what they once were. But the ACC is just struggling to find anybody outside of Clemson to put forward. The Big 12 is a lot in the exact same situation. Just replace Clemson with Oklahoma, and a lot of the same argument kind of stands with Texas, falling all over themselves trying to get back, and Oklahoma State nearly losing to Tulsa. I mean, it's really the Big Ten and the SEC, and that's why I say that I fully expect the Big Ten champion, unless there's a 2-loss situation that occurs, or a 3-loss situation that occurs even. I fully expect the Big Ten champion to be represented this year in the college football playoff pretty easily.
You talk about the bottom of the league. You're saying Rutgers couldn't get it over on Arkansas, because I'm assuming that I don't follow the SEC as closely, but they've been pretty putrid. But then again, so is Rutgers. Oh yeah,
yeah. Rutgers and Maryland, they are kind of the anchors of the Big Ten. They you compare them to the SEC to Vanderbilt and Arkansas, and yeah, those teams don't sound very wowing from the namesake the last few years, but according to my model and where things are at, Arkansas would be at about 11 or 12 point favorite over Rutgers this year. So like I said, that's kind of where the two conferences diverge, is at the very bottom.
And I'm gonna ask you one final question here. I mean, in terms of just this upcoming season, so unless the Big Ten somehow cannibalizes itself to the nth degree, you do see the Big Ten champion getting in. I mean, obviously, an ACC champion, be it Clemson. I mean, if Notre Dame's able to run it, I mean, and they have to beat Clemson along the way or whatnot. Obviously, the SEC is the SEC. Are you kind of seeing a setup where it's going to be the usual setup? Big Ten, Big 12, ACC, SEC champions are all going to be reflected, or is there somebody is there a conference that might spit two out that we're just not really thinking of because we're just trying to make this all nice and neat and wrap a little bow on it?
Well, I think with the Big 12 and the way that they have gotten started, especially if Oklahoma stumbles once, even no matter how impressive they look the rest of the year, I think it would be really, really hard for them to be able to get a team in over maybe two SEC teams that have played close games all year long. So in that scenario, especially in the recent years, Oklahoma has made the playoff. I know the playoff committee is not supposed to consider previous years in their consideration, but that's got to play in a little bit to the minds of those people, especially this year, in a year where it's going to be so subjective anyway, because there's no cross conference matchups that we can use to compare anything to. So the all black box of the eye test this year is going to be all encompassing, and I assume that leaves the door even wider open for two SEC teams to maybe to get in over the Big 12 or over the ACC if Clemson stumbles and falls, or I guess if Notre Dame, I keep forgetting Notre Dame's probably ACC with this year. That's so weird. But if either one of those teams stumbles too much in the ACC, it's a weak enough conference. So I think they would use that as an excuse to get two SEC teams in.
And let the arguments begin at that point. But let's get the Big Ten to the table first and let them play some games before we start getting outraged over anything. But I want to thank you for being part of the show, and I want to give you an opportunity to to share your work with all of our listeners. I mean, I know that you're doing stuff on Patreon, I guess. Why don't you tell people what they could get there and how they can join you over there and get all of this modeling and all this great information that, as you said, you're coming in higher than FPI and Sagarin or whatnot. I mean, this is the stuff that people that really love the numbers, love the data analytics, it's crazy for them not to be involved with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I touch on a variety of areas on my Patreon. I get into a little bit of head coach and coordinator evaluation and grading them using the before mentioned 12-year play calling database from all the way from the career level down to the single game level. I have team projections, which include a preseason win-loss prediction for every single team, as well as spread projections and win chances for every game played using this mathematical model that I have. So far on the year, it's hitting about 77% straight up and 52% against the spread. So it's right on track to what COVID hasn't seemed to bother it so far. Also, when it comes closer time to the playoff committee top 25 shows that come out, I have a prediction model that is the best in the industry. It's only off an average of 0.6 places per team for the entire top 25 of the last 5 years. And that comes out the night before the first poll is released. So to get involved with that, just follow me on Twitter at CFB_professor, or go onto my Patreon page at patreon.com/CFB_professor and sign up for the amount of content that fits your passion.
Absolutely. And I will be sure to link that on our story on Buckeye Grove, on the podcast on YouTube, as well as on SoundCloud. So if you're driving in your car and you're afraid you're going to forget, I will make sure you can get there so you can check out all of Adam McClintock's great work. So again, I want to thank you for being part of the show. We've gone about 32 minutes, which is a pretty healthy show for the BIA. Any other final thoughts before we call it a show?
Man, it's good. We have a season to look forward to, isn't it? That's all. If the mullet completely goes to crap this year for the first year in 12 years, for the first time, it wouldn't bother me a whole lot because, hey, we got football to watch in the Big Ten, and that's something I wasn't for sure we were going to see. So let's kick off. Let's get going.
Absolutely. As soon as that first play is played, I got a six-pack bet that I've got to cash in from a buddy of mine who said that we were never going to get to that point. And I'm not so much about caring about the beer. I'm just happy that we're going to have football back. It has been a long off season, and I just can't wait. And I'm so excited for all the fans, all the athletes, everybody who loves college football so much, and selfishly myself, since this is how I make a living as well. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. So we're gonna wrap this up. For Adam, I am Kevin Noon, your host here on the BIA podcast, and I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.